Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision.
Right, like it's math or engineering or something.
Yeah, exactly. Like you break your arm, the doctor pulls up the x-ray, points to that jagged white line and just says, there it is. There's the problem.
It's binary. I mean, the bone is either broken or it isn't.
Hmm.
And as a patient or a parent, really, that clarity is just, well, it's deeply comforting. We naturally crave things that we can see and categorize.
We totally do.
Hmm.
But the moment you step into the world of neurodevelopment and psychology and, just raising a human being, that x-ray machine completely shatters.
Oh, it's gone.
Right. We are suddenly navigating a landscape that is just entirely murky. And that is exactly why we curated this specific stack of research for you today. So welcome to the Book Nook. We are so glad you're here.
We really are.
Today, we're exploring a framework that basically flips the traditional parenting script completely upside down. We're doing a deep dive into Amy Morin's paradigm-shifting book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do.
Such an incredible piece of work.
It really is. And the mission for this deep dive is to uncover how to build actual, mental muscle in children. We aren't looking at what you need to add to your already overflowing plate. We are examining the specific, deeply ingrained habits that parents actually need to stop doing.
Which is a profound structural shift, right? I mean, if you look at modern parenting advice, it's almost entirely additive.
Always. Add this class, buy this toy.
Exactly. We spend years searching for this magic formula of what to do. Like, what are the optimal extracurriculars? What's the exact phrasing I should use when praising my toddler? What specific organic snack is going to, boost cognitive function?
Right, the superfood pouches.
Yeah, the pouches. But Morin, she forces us to hit the brakes. She makes us consider what we are inadvertently doing that is actively sabotaging our children's resilience.
And what makes this framework so compelling, and really why we wanted to break this down for you, is the author's own crucible. I mean, Amy Morin isn't just some researcher in a lab coat observing kids from a distance.
No, she lived it.
She really did. She was a psychotherapist and a therapeutic foster parent, taking in kids with severe behavioral and emotional issues. But the framework we're looking at today, it was actually forged in an unimaginable personal tragedy.
Yeah, her backstory is just heartbreaking.
It's devastating. In a shockingly rapid succession, she lost her mother to a brain aneurysm, then her 26-year-old husband to a sudden heart attack, and then, shortly after she remarried, she lost her father-in-law to terminal cancer.
And when you look at the genesis of her work, she didn't sit down to write her famous 13 Things list to get a book deal or for an audience at all.
Right, it was private.
Completely private. She wrote it as a letter to herself during the absolute lowest point of her grief. It was a personal survival guide, basically. She needed a mechanism to ward off the self-pity that could have easily, and frankly understandably, consumed her.
Oh, totally understandably.
So that original list went viral because it resonated so universally. But now she's taking that deeply personal, hard-won framework and applying it to the impossible task of raising kids.
And she grounds this entire philosophy in a quote from Frederick Douglass. He said, "It's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men."
Wow. Yeah, that concept really dictates everything we're going to unpack today. She conceptualizes mental strength as this triad, right? 3 core components: regulating thoughts, managing emotions, and behaving productively.
Okay, so thoughts, emotions, behavior.
Exactly, because if a child has exaggeratedly negative thoughts, they'll never reach their potential. Their internal narrative just defeats them before they even begin.
Right.
And if they can't regulate their emotions, they'll constantly succumb to fear or anger whenever they face friction. And finally, if they behave unproductively, like, say, refusing to step outside their comfort zone, they just remain stagnant. All 3 gears have to turn together.
So let's start with the thought regulation piece, because if you want to build a strong kid, the foundational requirement is making sure they don't view themselves as helpless. Which brings us to Morin's first major roadblock: the victim mentality.
Such a huge one.
It really is.
Yeah.
You cannot build mental muscle if a child firmly believes the entire universe is conspiring against them. But the terrifying twist here is that often it is our own parental guilt that accidentally builds this exact victimhood in our kids.
Right. When a parent feels sorry for their child or views them as a victim of a specific diagnosis or an unfair circumstance, the child immediately absorbs that belief.
They soak it right up.
They do. It stops being an external challenge and becomes an internal identity. It's a total self-fulfilling prophecy.
Okay, the story of Cody really illustrates this danger beautifully. So Cody is a 14-year-old boy, and his parents brought him to therapy because he was failing several classes. Now, he had been diagnosed with ADHD the previous year, and his parents were just absolutely furious at his school. They felt the administration wasn't accommodating his diagnosis enough. But the crazy thing is, the teachers had actually moved his desk to the front of the room. They gave him extra time on all his tests. They set up a system to check his assignment book every single day. And they even personally invited him to an after-school homework club.
So the school was actually providing a really robust scaffolding system for him.
Exactly. But Cody wasn't utilizing a single piece of it. He refused to stay after school, and he simply wasn't doing his homework.
Wow.
So when Morin gently presented this reality to the parents in therapy, the mother's response was just chilling. She literally said, "But extra time and extra help aren't enough. He has ADHD. He shouldn't be expected to do the same amount of work as the other kids."
Oh, wow. Think about the cognitive dissonance there.
Right. Okay, let's unpack this, because the parents literally believed that his diagnosis rendered him inherently incapable of equal output. And they telegraphed that belief directly into Cody's brain.
So, of course, he stopped trying.
Of course he did. It's basically like assuming a kid with a sprained ankle can never walk again, rather than, putting them through physical therapy and expecting them to eventually run.
That's a perfect analogy. The parents genuinely believed they were fulfilling their duty. They thought they were fiercely advocating for him against this callous, unyielding school system. But by lowering the bar to the floor, they were endorsing a victim mentality.
They gave him a permanent excuse.
Exactly. They taught Cody that his ADHD was a permanent excuse for failure. But the turning point came when Morin forced them to shift their own thinking and actually hold him accountable.
What did they do?
They instituted a rule that he had to finish his homework before he could access any electronics. And they began monitoring his actual effort, not just his diagnosis.
Yeah.
And guess what? His academic performance completely turned around.
Wow.
Yeah. He didn't need fewer expectations. He needed his parents to demonstrate that they actually believed he was capable of meeting them.
But wait, I'm stuck on this. Because if we pull back and look at the broader culture, aren't we hyper-focused on calling out grievances right now? I mean, you scroll through social media and society seems to actively reward people for claiming they've been wronged.
Oh, absolutely.
So how do parents fight this broader victimhood culture that Morin talks about when the external world is constantly validating it?
Well, what's fascinating here is that it requires a massive amount of intentionality from the parent because you really are swimming against the sociological current. Morin actually cites the work of sociologists Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning, who map out this cultural evolution.
Right, the different types of cultures.
Yeah. So historically, societies operated under an honor culture where people settle disputes aggressively and personally. Think of duels or Wild West shootouts.
Right, high noon.
Exactly. Over time, as legal systems strengthened, we shifted into a dignity culture. In a dignity culture, you handle minor offenses quietly, you brush off insults, and you only escalate major illegal issues to the authorities.
That makes sense.
But their research suggests we have now fully transitioned into a victimhood culture. In this paradigm, individuals actively broadcast their grievances to third parties, publicly advertise their oppression, and basically demand that the rest of the world accommodate their sensitivities.
Which perfectly explains the Starbucks red cup controversy she mentions.
Yes. Perfect example.
I remember back in 2015, there was this genuine, widespread outrage over a coffee chain using solid red cups for the holidays. People were claiming it was a literal attack on their personal beliefs, demanding public apologies, and seeking solidarity for their victimhood over a paper cup.
Over a paper cup.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when you raise a child in an environment where that kind of reaction is normalized behavior, they're being primed for learned helplessness.
And learned helplessness is the psychological bedrock of the victim mentality. It traces back to Martin Seligman's foundational dog shock studies in the 1960s.
Oh, this study's so tough to hear about, but it's important.
It really is difficult methodology to think about, but the psychological implications are profound. So, Seligman subjected dogs to electric shocks in an enclosed box. But here's the key. One group of dogs was given a mechanism. They had a lever they could press with their nose to immediately stop the shock. They had agency.
Okay, so they could control it.
Yes. But the second group of dogs received the exact same shocks, and they had no lever. Nothing they did mattered. They had zero control over the pain.
And the second phase of the experiment is where it gets absolutely terrifying for us as parents.
It really does. So later, Seligman took all the dogs from both groups and put them in a new type of crate. This crate just had a very low partition in the middle. The floor on one side would shock them, but all they had to do to escape the pain was simply step over that low partition to the safe side.
Right.
Now, the dogs from the first group, the ones who had the lever and learned they had control, they immediately jumped over the partition to safety. But the dogs from the second group, the ones who had learned that they were powerless,
What did they do?
they didn't even attempt to jump. They just lay down on the floor and endured the shock. They had learned to be helpless.
Wow.
So when we teach kids they're victims of their ADHD or a strict teacher or a tough math worksheet, we are putting them in that second group. We teach them that effort is futile. So when they face a minor hurdle, a low partition, they just lie down and suffer.
That is such a powerful image. So how do we rewire a brain to jump the partition? Like, how do we give our kids the lever?
Morin suggests teaching kids to catch their BLUE thoughts.
Okay, let's spell that out. BLUE thoughts.
Yes. BLUE is an incredibly practical acronym used in cognitive behavioral therapy to help kids identify thinking errors. It stands for blaming everyone else, looking for bad news, unhappy guessing, which basically means making catastrophic predictions about the future, and exaggeratedly negative thoughts.
Oh, okay. Blaming, looking for bad news, unhappy guessing, exaggeratedly negative.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
when your child comes home and says, my teacher hates me, so I'm going to fail this class and never get into college, you don't just comfort them. You stop and ask, is that a BLUE thought or a true thought?
Oh, I love that. BLUE thought or true thought.
Right. You teach them to step outside their own internal monologue and objectively evaluate the evidence. You are essentially training their prefrontal cortex to override their emotional amygdala response.
I really love that because you are giving them the tools to dismantle their own victim narrative.
Hmm.
And you contrast those BLUE thoughts with the ultimate example of empowerment from the book, Jim Abbott.
Yeah.
His story is just the perfect antidote to this. So he was born without a right hand, and when he was a kid and decided he wanted to play baseball, his parents didn't coddle him. They didn't say, oh, honey, baseball requires two hands, let's find something safer. They literally just looked at him and asked, why not?
Just why not? I love it.
And because they didn't project a victim narrative onto him, he just figured it out. He learned to balance his glove on his right forearm, pitch the ball with his left hand, rapidly slide the glove onto his left hand, and field the ball.
Unbelievable.
And he went on to win an Olympic gold medal and pitched a no-hitter in Major League Baseball.
He achieved that entirely because his parents refused to let his physical reality become a psychological prison. But, we have to ask ourselves, why is it so incredibly hard for modern parents to act like Jim Abbott's parents?
What's getting in our way?
Morin identifies the core culprit, and it is almost usually parental guilt. We feel guilty for working too much, or for getting a divorce, or simply just for seeing our kids frustrated. And out of that guilt, we overcompensate.
And we see the catastrophic result of this in the story of Joe and his 8-year-old son, Micah. So Joe is a single dad, and Micah is nearly 100 pounds overweight. His health is in serious jeopardy. It's to the point where the pediatrician is actually threatening to involve Child Protective Services if things don't change.
It was a dire situation.
Extremely dire. Yet Joe continues to feed him second and third helpings at dinner and allows endless junk food snacking. And when Morin pushed Joe on this in therapy, his confession was just heartbreaking. He said, I know I feed him too much, but I can't stand to see him hungry.
Joe's guilt was literally killing his son. He couldn't tolerate the short-term emotional discomfort of saying no, and he couldn't bear to see his child momentarily unhappy. He was parenting entirely out of his own unresolved guilt.
Wow.
This really brings to mind the work of D.W. Winnicott, a mid-century pediatrician and psychoanalyst. He studied thousands of mother-infant dyads and developed the concept of the good enough mother.
The good enough mother, not the perfect mother.
Exactly. His research concluded that trying to be the perfectly accommodating, flawlessly responsive parent is actually detrimental to a child's development. A good enough parent, one who makes mistakes, who occasionally fails to respond immediately, who allows the child to experience minor frustrations, is precisely what the child needs to develop a healthy sense of reality.
Because if you create a flawless, frictionless environment for your kid, you leave them completely unequipped for a world that is, guaranteed to be full of friction.
Exactly. They need to see you set boundaries. They need to experience the healthy guilt of doing something wrong.
So how do we help them with that?
Well, Morin advises parents to use concepts like Freud's shoulder angel, the visualization of a conscience, to help kids navigate their own internal moral compass. If a child's friend asks to copy their homework and the child says no, they might feel guilty for upsetting their friend.
Right, because they want to be liked.
Right. But a parent has to help them realize that this is a healthy guilt. If we constantly swoop in to relieve them of all guilt and discomfort, they become adults who fold to every manipulative guilt trip because they have zero tolerance for emotional friction.
Which provides a seamless logical bridge to Morin's next major pillar. Because when parents are chronically operating out of guilt, when they are terrified of their child feeling slighted or deprived,
Yeah.
they inevitably construct a universe where the child is the center of gravity.
Yeah.
And doing that dangerously inverts the natural family hierarchy. You end up giving children an enormous amount of power they were never, ever meant to wield.
It is the architectural blueprint for a generation of entitlement. I mean, from a developmental standpoint, young children naturally possess an egocentric view of the world. In their minds, the sun rises simply because they woke up.
Right. That's just normal toddler stuff.
Exactly. It's a normal stage of cognitive development. But the danger arises when parents reinforce that egocentrism year after year by ensuring the family's entire existence, schedule, and emotional bandwidth revolves entirely around the child's immediate desires. The child never receives the critical developmental feedback that the world actually exists independently of them.
And Morin specifically calls out parents who dote endlessly as a way to compensate for their own childhood deficits. Like, you have the dad who grew up in poverty buying his teenager a luxury car, or the mom who felt emotionally ignored by her own parents, ensuring her child receives a literal standing ovation for drawing a stick figure.
Yes, the overcompensation is real.
So, help me understand the fallout of this regarding self-esteem. Because if you grew up in the 90s, like a lot of us, the dominant psychological gospel was that kids needed constant, unyielding praise, participation trophies. You are the smartest. You're the most special. At what point does healthy encouragement mutate into toxic centering?
That mutation is exactly what psychologist Jean Twenge has spent her career studying regarding the narcissism epidemic.
Oh, this is fascinating.
It really is. For decades, the prevailing theory was that narcissism stemmed from cold, distant, unemotional parenting, that people became narcissists to fill a void of love. But Twenge's extensive datasets reveal the exact opposite.
Wait, really?
Yes. Today's narcissistic adults do not come from parents who ignored them. They come from parents who overvalued them. They come from homes where parents constantly told them they were exceptionally special, inherently more deserving than their peers, and basically the magical exception to every single rule.
It's the difference between praising effort and praising an inflated identity.
Precisely. When a parent offers undeserved praise, they create a vicious psychological cycle. The child internalizes this exceptionalism without having developed the corresponding competence, so they become obsessed with maintaining this facade of superiority and require an endless, exhausting supply of external validation.
And the real world isn't going to give them that.
Exactly. Employers, partners, society at large, they will never provide that level of validation, so the individual is perpetually outraged and disappointed.
And we see that outrage play out in the home when these kids are suddenly told no. Let's look at Clarissa's story from the book.
Oh, Clarissa, yes.
So Clarissa was 16 years old, a straight-A honor student, and a highly talented athlete. From the outside, she looked like the absolute perfect teenager. But behind closed doors, whenever her parents, Alan and Jenna, tried to enforce even the most basic household rules, Clarissa would escalate the situation by threatening to cut herself.
It is just the most paralyzing, terrifying scenario a parent can face.
Absolutely paralyzing. But as Morin worked with the family in therapy, she uncovered the underlying dynamic. Clarissa had slowly, systematically been acquiring all the power in the family for years. Because she was intelligent and successful, her parents treated her not as a dependent, but as a co-equal adult.
Right. They blurred the lines completely.
They totally did. She became accustomed to dictating terms. So when they finally attempted to reassert parental authority and just say no, she felt her power slipping. To maintain her dominance, she deployed the ultimate trump card, the threat of self-harm. She essentially weaponized their love and fear against them, instantly forcing them into submission.
It's manipulation born out of a misplaced hierarchy.
So how did we get here culturally? I mean, if you look at the 1950s, the prevailing ethos was children should be seen and not heard. It was a rigid authoritarian hierarchy. But today, we have 10-year-olds casting the deciding vote on whether the family should relocate to a new state for a job.
The cultural pendulum swung violently. As our understanding of childhood neurodevelopment and attachment theory deepened, society rightfully abandoned that cold authoritarianism of the mid-20th century.
Which is a good thing.
It's a great thing. We recognize that children require warmth, emotional validation, and nurturing to thrive. However, in our rush to dismantle authoritarianism, we accidentally dismantled the hierarchy entirely. We elevated children to the status of equals, or in some cases superiors, without acknowledging their biological limitations.
Right, their brains literally aren't ready for it.
Exactly. The neurological reality is that a child's brain, specifically the prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control, long-term risk assessment, and complex decision-making, does not fully mature until their mid-20s. Giving a 10-year-old the power to dictate family finances or veto a cross-country move is like putting a completely untrained passenger in the cockpit of a commercial airliner.
Oh, that's terrifying.
Right. They might enjoy pressing the buttons initially, but subconsciously it generates massive anxiety because they know they're fundamentally unequipped to fly the plane.
That analogy makes so much sense. The anxiety comes from knowing there's no competent captain up there. So how do parents reclaim the cockpit?
Well, Morin offers some incredibly sharp, actionable tools for this. The first one sounds obvious, but is constantly violated today. Separate adult conversations from kid conversations.
Oh, definitely.
Your 10-year-old does not need to know the intimate details of why Aunt Susie is filing for bankruptcy or the nuances of your marital disagreements.
Because boundaries create safety.
Exactly. Boundaries create safety. You also have to stop asking your child for permission to parent them. When a major life event occurs, you don't ask, is it okay with you if we move to Chicago? You ask, how are you feeling about our move to Chicago?
Ah, I see the difference.
Yeah, you validate their emotional response to the decision, but you make it unequivocally clear that the adults are making the structural decisions.
I thought the pop culture example she pulled for this was just brilliant. She references a scene from The Cosby Show, and, regardless of the actor's subsequent legacy, the script logic here is a masterclass in what she calls empowered language.
It really is perfectly written.
So the teenage daughter gets into a fight at school because she's bragging about an $11,000 painting her parents bought. She comes home crying, entirely lacking perspective, and yells, "This wouldn't have happened if we weren't so rich." And the dad just looks at her calmly and says, "Let me get something straight. Okay, your mother and I are rich. You have nothing."
It is the perfect linguistic reestablishment of the hierarchy. It communicates to the child. You are deeply loved, you are fiercely protected, and you are fully provided for, but you are not the peer of the adults in this house. You do not own the resources.
Exactly.
Another powerful mechanism for decentering the child is actively instilling a sense of awe and gratitude. When you take a child out to look at the Milky Way, or when you involve them in serving populations that are truly struggling, you recalibrate their perspective.
Like the story of Jackson Silverman from the book.
Yes. Jackson Silverman, a 10-year-old boy who realized that kids at his school were actually going hungry over the weekend. He didn't just feel bad. He started a youth volunteer program to pack weekend lunch bags. He ended up packing over 14,000 lunches.
That is incredible.
It is. And a child cannot engage in that level of outward-facing empathy if their parents have trained them to believe the universe revolves entirely around their own immediate gratification.
That makes total sense. But the moment a parent realizes they need to take the power back and stop over-accommodating, they usually slam into a massive internal wall. Because the underlying force driving that micromanagement isn't always guilt. Often, it is pure, unadulterated fear.
Oh, fear is huge.
Fear that their child will be hurt, emotionally or physically. And if you want to build mental strength, you have to confront the paralysis of fear and accept the necessity of pain.
Absolutely. Because when parents allow fear to dictate their choices, they unwittingly transition their role from being a guide to being a protector.
A guide versus a protector. Tell me about that.
So a guide's primary objective is to help a child navigate the world so they can thrive, learn, and expand. A protector's primary objective, however, is merely to ensure the child survives by avoiding all possible discomfort or danger.
Which brings us to Anna and her 12-year-old daughter, Zoe. Anna dragged Zoe into counseling because she claimed Zoe was completely out of control. And what was her defining evidence of this wild rebellion? Zoe had dyed her hair blonde without asking for permission.
Which is, completely normal preteen stuff.
Totally normal. But it became clear that Anna had constructed this militant, rigidly controlled schedule for her children. And the control had nothing to do with raising successful kids. It was entirely about managing Anna's own undiagnosed anxiety. She was using her children's compliance as a soothing mechanism for her own fear.
It's a classic case of contagious anxiety.
But wait, here's where it gets really interesting. I have to challenge the premise here. Because if we look at evolutionary biology, isn't it our absolute imperative to shield our offspring from harm? Like we are hardwired to protect them. It almost feels like Morin is suggesting parents should just stand by and watch their toddler reach for a hot stove to teach them a lesson. How do we reconcile biological protection with this advice?
Well, it is a critical distinction to make. Morin is not advocating for negligence, obviously. You absolutely intervene to stop catastrophic, life-altering harm. You stop them from running into a busy intersection. You definitely pull their hand away from a hot stove.
Okay, good.
But modern anxious parenting blurs the line between catastrophic harm and necessary developmental pain. A 2012 study published in the Journal of Family Psychology provides startling clarity on this.
What did they find?
Researchers found that highly anxious parents are notoriously terrible at predicting what will actually traumatize their kids. Yes, they project their own catastrophic thinking onto the child, expecting the child to be emotionally devastated by a lost soccer game, a failed spelling test, or just a minor social rejection. So the parent swoops in to prevent the event entirely, but in doing so, they actively rob the child of the opportunity to practice coping skills.
Which brings up Morin's concept of the resilience piggy bank. I love this metaphor. Explain how that works.
Think of resilience as an internal bank account. Every time you allow a child to struggle through a difficult homework problem on their own, or have them navigate a disagreement with a friend without intervening, you are making a deposit into their bank of competence.
Okay, so overcoming small struggles equals a deposit.
Right. And every time they experience genuine pain, the death of a pet, a severe romantic rejection, a major failure, a withdrawal is made from that bank.
That makes sense.
So if you have allowed them to face minor discomforts and build their competence over time, their account is full. They have the emotional currency to afford the withdrawal and recover. But if you have operated as a protector, shielding them from every minor frustration, their bank is completely empty. The first major, unavoidable life hardship they face will bankrupt them emotionally because they have zero reserves.
I think the most counterintuitive evidence of this is the Kent State study. Researchers track young adults who grew up in households where their parents suffered from severe chronic physical pain conditions, like Crohn's disease or fibromyalgia.
Such an important study.
It is, because the standard assumption is that growing up with a sick parent would be deeply traumatizing and lead to severe anxiety. But the study found the exact opposite. Those kids actually developed significantly expanded emotional understanding, stronger character, superior time management skills, and a much deeper capacity for empathy. The unavoidable pain they experienced while growing up actually provided them with the architectural tools to thrive in adulthood.
It proves that pain is not the enemy of development. It is the catalyst for it. Pain heightens the senses. It makes the eventual acquisition of a reward vastly more meaningful. If we constantly insulate them, we dull their entire experience of life.
Wow.
Morin actually suggests teaching kids to actively categorize their fear. When a child is afraid, you ask them, is your fear acting as a friend right now or an enemy?
A friend or an enemy.
Yeah. Fear is a friend when you are standing on the edge of a high cliff looking down at shallow water. It stops you from making a lethal mistake. But fear is an enemy when you are sitting in math class and it stops you from raising your hand because you are terrified of getting the answer wrong. We have to teach them to interrogate the emotion.
But, if we commit to not shielding them from pain, we immediately face the consequences. We have to deal with their emotional reactions to that pain. And Morin argues that we must stop taking responsibility for cheering them up or calming them down. We have to force them to take emotional responsibility.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this might be the single hardest habit for a loving parent to break. When we see our child sad, angry, or frustrated, our biological empathy kicks in, and we immediately try to fix it. We buy them ice cream after a bad game, we play the court jester to distract them, we buy them a new toy.
We want to make it better.
Of course.
Yeah.
But if the parent is always the one responsible for changing the child's emotional state, the child never develops the internal mechanisms to self-soothe.
Let's look at Grace's situation from the book. She is a 12-year-old girl, and her parents, Jeremy and Suzanne, live their entire lives basically walking on eggshells. If Grace didn't want to go to a restaurant or didn't want to do her chores, she would throw a massive screaming tantrum.
At 12 years old.
At 12. And Jeremy and Suzanne would immediately cave just to restore peace in the house. They managed her emotions by capitulating to them. The result. At 12 years old, Grace's friendships were completely disintegrating. She literally had the emotional maturity of a toddler. She tried to boss her peers around and would actually burst into tears at school when she didn't get her way.
Her parents genuinely believed they were keeping her happy, but structurally they were stunting her emotional maturation. The core principle Morin emphasizes here is that parents must learn to correct the behavior, not the emotion.
That's a huge distinction.
It is. Emotions are morally neutral.
Yeah.
It is perfectly fine and healthy for a child to feel intense anger. It is not fine for a child to throw a remote control at their sibling because they are angry. You have to validate the internal state while policing the external action. You say, I can see that you are feeling incredibly angry that your brother changed the channel. I understand why you want to hit him, but in this house, we respect other people's physical safety.
It changes the script on how we talk to them, too. So many of us have the habit of getting in the car after school and asking, how was your day? But Morin suggests that open-ended question might actually be a trap, especially if you have a kid who naturally defaults to the negative. If they get in the car and complain every single day, and we constantly respond with, oh, honey, I'm so sorry that happened to you, we essentially become their emotional pacifiers. We reward their victimhood with our sympathy. How do we shift that dynamic?
You stop rewarding the negative loop and start going after the good, instead of the generic, how was your day? Morin advises parents to ask highly specific, positively oriented questions like, what was the absolute best part of school today? Or tell me one thing that made you laugh today.
Oh, we like that.
Yeah. You force their brain to scan the day's data for positive inputs before they can complain. And if they are stuck in a deep negative emotional loop, you teach them the cognitive skill of changing the channel.
Okay, this connects to the white bear experiment, which I found totally fascinating because it perfectly explains why telling a kid to just stop crying never works.
It's a classic exercise in social psychology that demonstrates the paradox of thought suppression. So if I look at you right now and say, for the next 60 seconds, whatever you do, absolutely do not think about a white bear, what instantly happens in your brain?
My brain immediately conjures a giant roaring polar bear. Like it occupies my entire working memory. I can't think of anything else.
Exactly. When you instruct a brain not to think about a specific subject, the brain has to keep that subject active in the working memory just to monitor whether or not it is thinking about it.
That makes so much sense.
Right. So telling a child, don't think about that mean kid at recess, guarantees they will obsessively ruminate on that kid. Changing the channel means recognizing that you cannot suppress a thought, you can only replace it. You shift their behavioral focus. You have them build a Lego set, run a lap around the yard, or engage in bubble breaths, which is deep diaphragmatic breathing that physically lowers their heart rate. You basically give them a physical calm down kit so they learn to regulate their own nervous system.
And if the emotional struggle isn't anger, but frustration over a difficult task, you can employ what she calls the Batman effect. There was a 2016 study published in the journal Child Development that sounds almost too simple to be true, but the neurology behind it is brilliant.
Oh, I love the Batman effect.
Me too. So researchers took young kids and assigned them incredibly boring, repetitive, tedious tasks. The kids were told they could stop and go play video games in the next room whenever they wanted. But before they started, the researchers told a specific group of kids to pretend they were a hardworking, persistent character, like Batman, Dora the Explorer, or Bob the Builder. They even gave them props, like a cape.
And the results were highly significant. The children who engaged in psychological distancing by taking on the persona of a superhero persisted at the frustrating tasks far longer than the control group.
Because they weren't themselves anymore.
Exactly. When a child embodies Batman, they decouple their immediate emotional sensation of boredom from their working memory. They ask themselves, would Batman give up on this puzzle? And because Batman is persistent, the child borrows that persistence. It's an incredibly practical tool for parents. Instead of lecturing a crying kid about cleaning their room, you just say, show me exactly how Superman would clean up these blocks. It provides an emotional buffer.
But, even Superman occasionally crashes. And Morin is unyielding on this next point. We cannot present our kids from making mistakes. She tells the story of Taylor, a high school student who appeared to be a massive success. She got great grades, played sports, and seemed perfect. But the reality was that her mother, Maria, was micromanaging every single second of Taylor's existence. Maria tracked her assignments, packed her bags, managed her schedule, and effectively lived Taylor's life for her just to ensure Taylor never failed.
And we have hard data on the long-term consequences of Maria's parenting style. Research out of the University of Colorado studied young adults raised in these highly structured, heavily managed environments, what we typically call helicopter parenting. The researchers found that these young adults had significantly lower executive function capabilities than their peers. Because their parents acted as their external prefrontal cortex, the children never developed their own. They struggled to manage their own time, regulate their goal setting, or pivot when faced with unexpected challenges. If we want capable adults, we must let our children experience the natural consequences of their mistakes. But the critical second half of that equation is that the parent must then debrief the mistake with the child.
Right, you don't just watch them fail a test and say, well, I hope you learned your lesson. You sit down at the kitchen table and investigate the failure without judgment. You ask, okay, you failed the history exam. What went wrong with the study plan? Did you start too late? Were you distracted by your phone? What specific changes can we make for the next exam?
Exactly. It's a debrief.
It reminds me of the famous Thomas Edison quote about the light bulb. When asked about his constant failures, he reframed it completely. I've not failed 10,000 times. I've successfully found 10,000 ways that will not work. By debriefing the mistake, we teach kids to view failure not as an indictment of their character, but as necessary data collection.
Which requires the parent to possess the emotional fortitude to tolerate the short-term agony of watching their child fail. You have to let them get a 0 on the project they left at home to secure the long-term benefit of raising an adult who actually remembers to bring their own work to the office.
And that reality creates the perfect bridge to Morin's final major concept: responsibility, discipline, and auditing your values. Because if you are going to let your child make mistakes and force them to manage their own emotions, you have to enforce genuine responsibility in the home. And that means the parents can no longer rely on easy shortcuts.
Shortcuts are the absolute enemy of mental strength. Every time a parent takes a shortcut, they rob the child of a developmental repetition.
The story of Chris is the ultimate cautionary tale of what happens when parents take shortcuts for 2 decades. Chris is 26 years old. After graduating high school, he informed his parents, Martha and Jim, that he wasn't interested in college and was going to enter the workforce. But instead of working, he spent the next 7 years living in his childhood bedroom, playing video games all night, sleeping all day, and hanging out with his friends.
7 years.
7 years. Finally, after 7 years of funding his lifestyle, Martha and Jim kicked him out. They came to Morin's therapy practice desperate for strategies to ensure they wouldn't cave and let him move back in.
When Morin unpacked their family history, the pattern became obvious. Martha and Jim wanted Chris to be a responsible adult, but they had spent his entire life doing everything for him. Whenever there was friction, they took the shortcut. They safeguarded him from the demands of the real world because it was easier in the moment than fighting with him.
It feels exactly like taking out a payday loan. When you take a parenting shortcut, like doing your kid's science fair project the night before it's due so it looks perfect, or immediately handing a whining toddler an iPad in a restaurant so you can enjoy your appetizer in peace, you get immediate intoxicating relief from the tension. The screaming stops. The project is done. But the interest you're going to pay on that emotional payday loan 5, 10, or 20 years down the line is absolutely catastrophic. You end up with a 26-year-old living in your basement who lacks the fundamental skills to participate in society.
That metaphor captures the dynamic perfectly. You are constantly borrowing peace from your future to subsidize your present comfort. And the developmental data backs this up entirely. Marty Rossman, an associate professor at the University of Minnesota, conducted a longitudinal study tracking individuals from childhood into their 20s.
What did she find?
She found that assigning and enforcing childhood chores is one of the most significant predictors of lifelong success. Young children who are required to contribute to the household gain competence, self-reliance, and a deep sense of self-worth. They grow up to be better adjusted adults with higher capacities for empathy because they understand that they are part of an ecosystem that requires effort to maintain.
But let's be honest. Assigning and enforcing chores is exhausting.
Oh, it's terrible. It is infinitely easier for a tired mother to just load the dishwasher herself than to stand there and supervise an unwilling, complaining 10-year-old doing it poorly.
And when the kid pushes back against the chores or the rules, exhausted parents often resort to punishment instead of actual discipline. Morin draws a massive, bright red line between those two concepts.
It is a vital distinction for a child's mental health. Punishment is entirely backward-looking. It is driven by parental anger and is focused on inflicting suffering. It's about making the child feel bad for the mistake they already made. Discipline, however, is forward-looking.
Forward-looking, I like that.
Yeah, it is about teaching self-control, outlining logical consequences, and providing life lessons for the future. A landmark 2013 study from the University of Pittsburgh illuminated the devastating effects of punishment. Researchers found that harsh verbal discipline, cursing at a child, calling them names, or using sarcasm to insult them, is psychologically just as harmful as physical spanking. It directly correlates with increased behavioral problems and severe depressive symptoms as the child ages.
So to put that in practical terms, if your kid forgets their soccer cleats, yelling, "Why are you so stupid and forgetful? You ruin every Saturday," is punishment. It shames them. But saying, "Because you forgot your cleats, you cannot play in the game today. I know you're disappointed. What system are we going to build together so you remember them next week?" That is discipline. It enforces the natural consequence without attacking their character.
Precisely. Discipline utilizes natural and logical consequences to teach. But to discipline effectively, rather than just reacting emotionally, parents must have a clear understanding of their ultimate goals. They have to conduct an honest audit of their own values.
This part of the book really hit hard. Morin talks about how frequently parents lose their actual values in the heat of modern competition. The pressure of social media and the desire to have the best kid causes us to abandon our principles. She shares the story of her friend Sarah, who threw an incredibly elaborate, expensive birthday party for her 8-year-old daughter, Morgan. During the party, a guest handed Morgan a card. Morgan opened it, saw there was no physical toy, and yelled in front of everyone, "You didn't bring a gift, you only got me a card. That's really rude."
Oh, wow.
And the poor guest had to awkwardly explain that there was a gift card tucked inside.
It was a humiliating wake-up call for Sarah. She looked at her daughter's behavior and realized that she had gotten so swept up in the competitive nature of modern parenting, the elaborate Pinterest-perfect parties, the travel sports, the academic achievements, that she had completely neglected to instill basic gratitude, manners, and kindness in her child.
And this is not an isolated incident.
No, it is a systemic cultural issue. The Harvard Making Caring Common Project conducted a massive survey of teenagers. They found that a staggering 80% of teens believed their parents valued high achievement or personal happiness over caring for others.
80%.
80%. The teens were 3 times more likely to agree that their parents would be prouder of them getting good grades than if they were recognized as a caring community member.
That is a staggering indictment of our modern priorities. We constantly tell ourselves and our friends that we just want to raise kind, good kids. But our actions scream to our children that we want successful, comfortable kids no matter the ethical cost. We yell at the teenage umpire at the Little League game because of a bad call. We march into the school and complain to the teacher to get a B+ change to an A. We lie about our kids' age at the theme park to get a cheaper ticket. And our kids are watching every single second of it. They absorb our actual values from our behavior, completely ignoring our words.
Which is exactly why Morin suggests parents sit down and formally create a family mission statement. Write down what your family actually values. Is it honesty, hard work, compassion, resilience? Write it down and put it on the refrigerator. And then you have to do the hardest part. Hold yourself accountable to it.
That is the hardest part.
It is. When you screw up, when you lose your temper and yell at the referee in violation of your family value of respect, you have to go to your child, apologize, and admit that you failed to uphold the family mission statement. Demonstrating that level of vulnerability and accountability models true, durable mental strength for your child.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of psychological ground today. We've talked about breaking the victim mentality and dismantling the parental guilt that fuels it. We've discussed the necessity of taking our kids off the center pedestal and reclaiming the family hierarchy. We've explored the vital importance of facing pain instead of hiding behind parental fear, forcing our kids to manage their own emotional states, allowing them to fail and debriefing those failures, and doing the grueling, unglamorous work of enforcing chores and real discipline based on audited family values.
It is an arduous daily journey. Building mental strength in our children is not about achieving some state of parenting perfection. It's about striving for excellence, recognizing our own triggers, and having the courage to step back and let our children carry the weight they need to carry so they can build their own psychological muscles.
I want to leave you, our listener, with a final provocative thought that Morin places at the very end of her book. It's the story of Rick Hoyt. Rick was born in 1962, and during birth, his brain was severely deprived of oxygen. He was diagnosed as a spastic quadriplegic with cerebral palsy. The medical professionals sat his parents, Dick and Judy, down and bluntly advised them to institutionalize him. They told the parents that Rick would effectively be a vegetable for his entire life.
But Dick and Judy refused to accept that victim narrative. They brought their son home. They integrated him completely into their family life. They took him sledding. They took him swimming. They treated him like a regular child who was fully capable of understanding the world.
They just refused to give up.
Right. And eventually they noticed that his eyes were tracking their movements in the room. They fought relentlessly to get him a communicative computer device. And when he was finally able to use it, his very first words weren't a plea for help. His first words were, "Go Bruins."
Oh, I love that so much.
He had been following the hockey playoffs. Because of his parents' refusal to limit him, Rick went on to graduate from Boston University. And famously, with his father Dick pushing his custom wheelchair, the two of them competed in over 1,000 endurance races together, including multiple Boston marathons and full Ironman triathlons.
It is the ultimate proof that the limitations we place on our children, whether we do it out of our pity, our deep-seated fear, or our desperate need to control our own anxiety, are almost always just projections of our own mental barriers. If Dick and Judy Hoyt could look at a spastic quadriplegic child and refuse to let him be a victim of his circumstances, what possible excuse do the rest of us have? If we can simply find the courage to step out of our kids' way, if we can commit to stopping the 13 things mentally strong parents don't do, what could our children actually achieve?
It's a profound claim that challenges every instinct and assumption we have about what it means to love and protect our children.
This book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do, matters immensely. We curated this deep dive for anyone looking to raise resilient, autonomous, capable, and kind humans in a world that feels increasingly anxious and chaotic. If you want to dive deeper into the methodology and these concepts, we highly recommend you pick up a copy and explore it for yourself.
It will fundamentally change the way you view every minor daily interaction you have with your children.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. If you enjoyed this conversation and found value in it, please hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode.
We truly appreciate you spending your time and attention with us today.
And we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us which book you'd like us to explore next. We read every single one.